This month's Where Did the Road Go is brought to you by 6 amazing people. Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Bart Ooms, Billuminati, 36 Dingo, and Michael Fritzky. If you want to become a patron, www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And I have back with me, after a few months here, Mr. Joshua Cutchin.
Welcome. Greetings. It's good to be here for a change.
And Louise Hamill, who is coming to us from the future, because in her world, it's a day later than ours.
Yes, thanks for having me back, Seriah, and nice to speak with you, Josh. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Likewise.
And the last time you were on, we were trying to figure it out, and you said you looked it up, and it was 2021.
Yeah, quite some time.
So
yeah.
And you've had a lot of interesting stuff happen in between the last time you were on and this time.
I have the last 8 months to a year, maybe longer, had some very strange poltergeist, maybe fae activity. And I reached out to you initially because I couldn't figure out what was going on.
Yeah.
And some of it was pretty freaky. So I thought I need some people who maybe have a bit of experience with some of these happenings, you know, just to help me wrap my head around it, to be honest.
And Josh,
Yeah.
I think, might be better at that because of the context this stuff is happening in.
Yes.
So we shall see.
Yeah, we'll see about that.
Yeah.
I was speaking with my wife. We were just coming from a friend's house on the way over here, and I was saying, you know, there's probably there's a good 20 people I can think of off the top of my head who know more about fairies. So I will do my best with what I know.
But do they also?
Mm-hmm.
But do they also play tuba?
You know, no. The only other person that I found who is involved in this stuff and also plays tuba at some semi-professional level is Dan Ackroyd.
Interesting.
From what I understand is at one point was a relatively accomplished tuba player. So yeah, I guess it's kind of like you know, being the world's well, it's a dubious honor. Let's put it that way.
Does that make him a tubist?
Do you make vodka? Do you make vodka, Josh?
Do I make vodka? No, I do not make
Yes.
Skull vodka or anything like that. So he's got me on that count. Yeah,
I forgot Dan Aykroyd was interested in this stuff.
quite heavily.
Yeah.
You should get Dan Aykroyd on Where Did the Road Go, Seriah?
Oh, I'm sure that'll be easy. I'll just ring him up.
You know, stranger things have happened. You know.
All right, let's get to Louise's stuff. Now, Louise, do you want to give a little background to the stuff you came on for before so people can catch up here?
Okay, sure. I'll try and keep it succinct because there's a lot there.
Yeah, and people can go back and listen to the original episode, but just to put this stuff in context, I guess, is what I want to do.
Sure. So I guess the beginning would be when I was a baby, I had what logically you would call a near-death experience. So from what I have heard and read, a lot of people who've had near-death experiences tend to have this interesting relationship with psi and paranormal phenomena after that point. For me, I was no older than a year, and my mum had put me down for us to sleep in my cot upstairs, and she was downstairs doing the dishes in the kitchen, and she looked out the window, and I was sitting in the middle of the garden, not a scratch on me, but very pale and shocked. And she told the story like it had occurred within, you know, a minute or two, as if, you know, I just appeared there. So that in itself is an interesting story. You know, was it fae? Was it a teleporting instance? Who knows? I think logically she probably left the cot door open and I crawled out and I fell off the balcony, something like that. But either way, if it was something more bizarre or if it was a near-death experience, it primed me for a interesting reality for sure. And throughout my life, I have had a lot of experiences with, more spiritual haunting experiences that were really quite scary. And I spoke to you about that, Seriah, in a lot of detail. I saw a UFO in my mid-20s, quite close up, and that was a really amazing experience for me. And it really kind of changed the way I perceived things, probably more than the other stuff that was more psi and spiritual related, because those things I could kind of brush aside and rationalize in my brain. But when you see a physical object in the sky and it's over a period of, a good minute, it's not something that you could dismiss. That really, it really changed things for me, to kind of stop questioning what was happening. But I have had experiences with nature spirits that were quite profound. Even as a child, I used to spend a lot of time in the garden, and I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but on reflection, I was probably meditating, and I would talk to the garden in my mind. And I remember once this voice or this impression popped into my head and said, if you go over to the pot plant in this other part of the garden, you'll find a four-leaf clover. And I went over to this pot plant and I found a four-leaf clover, and it was, the only four-leaf clover in this pot of flowers. And another time I found a wooden ring on the step where I would sit, and it was like a piece of a branch that looked like it had been cut off in a disc and hollow in the middle, which I guess you could explain away, but for me that really felt like a gift from the garden. So I have a history of being interested and believing in the consciousness of nature. So whether, I'm more sensitive to these things in hotspots, my daughter, possibly, she inherited that from me as well. And my husband, who has had some experiences in the house we're living in now, he has had some other weird stuff happen in his life as well. So if you want, we can talk a bit about that. He saw the Min Min lights a few years ago. I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with that phenomena.
I've heard of them. I've heard of them. Tell people what they are briefly.
So they're usually seen in very rural parts of Australia, so more desert areas that I know of anyway. And they are a ball of light that seem to be sentient in some cases. They kind of float around. They are usually seen by people driving in cars down long highways, kind of quieter roads. And what happened was my husband for work was up north in Western Australia. If you look at Western Australia on the map, it is massive. So he was out in a very rural part, basically desert, driving around, and it was sort of twilight, becoming nighttime, and he became aware that there was this ball of light behind him about 100 yards in the rearview mirror. And at first he thought it was a car. So eventually he noticed that the ball of light was staying the same size. It was never getting closer, and it was kind of higher off the ground than headlights would be. And it was a single sphere. It wasn't, more lights that you would see, I guess, with a car. And this went on for, I think, about 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And anytime he would stop the car and it just disappeared. It wasn't there anymore.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so it never got any closer. And he said it was like the light was contained within the sphere. It wasn't reflecting or producing, a light beams in the regular sense.
Yeah.
It was all within this this ball of light, and it was in an amber color. And then he got to where he needed to go. I think eventually it just wasn't there anymore. Got to where he needed to go, and it wasn't until later that he started to think that was actually quite a strange thing. And recently he looked up the distance he was driving on the map for where he had to go, and the route that he was taking and how fast he was driving. It should have taken less than an hour, and he said it took him at least 2 hours. So he possibly has missing time from that event as well.
Yeah, or time distortion of some sorts. Yeah,
time distortion. Yeah.
Huh.
Because it almost sounds like found time. I don't know if we don't really have a term for that, but he said it took him longer than it took him longer than it should have.
It took him longer.
Okay, so yeah, I guess that would be missing time. I guess shorter. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And earlier when I said you're in the future, I failed to follow that up with you're in Australia, which is why you're in the future from us. But I guess people will have figured that out by now.
That's right. They've figured it out, I think.
Because you're 12 hours ahead of us. We're doing this on a Thursday night. It's a Friday morning for you.
Yep, and a beautiful morning.
Good.
Yeah. So we both have a few, me more than him, have some kind of supernatural weird things that we've experienced. And look, the area we live in is interesting as well. So we live in, I think it's okay to say, we live in an area called Guildford in Perth, and Guildford is a what's the word? It's a heritage protected area. So all the houses, most of the houses are around 100 years old at least. And most, if not all of the buildings are, again, at least 100 years old. We have like the second oldest pub in Australia, which was built in 1840-something, which compared to other colonised countries, I mean, you guys, I think you have buildings from the 1700s.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Depending on where you are in the U.S.
Yeah. So there is that kind of interesting aspect of possibly, a few haunted buildings. Guildford also has 2 rivers on either side of it, so it's kind of between 2 bodies of water. And we also live on a crossroads.
Oh.
So part of the story is to do with Hekate. And so the crossroads thing, I feel, is relevant.
Well, yeah, and between 2 rivers. I mean, that's double trouble, right?
Yeah. Yes. So we've lived here for almost 6 years now. And when we first moved in, it was just my husband and I at that point. I had a couple of strange, it's kind of that between a dream and between awake, where you might see a picture in your mind and it's kind of hyper real. It's almost like, is it a vision? Is it a visitation? Is it actually a dream? I don't know. But had this experience where I was lying in bed with my eyes closed and still awake. And I became aware of this figure, which I could not describe to you, but it was, I guess, maybe some kind of guardian. But they said to me, they basically said to me, okay, I'm going to show you this now. And this man turned around and he was like a First Nations man, and basically like very, very ancient kind of vibe. Turned around and his face was like the face of someone that had lived for 40,000 years. So his body looked youthful, but his face was like ancient, to the point where I screamed because I was so shocked. And he laughed. He laughed at me for shrieking, and then that was it. And I thought that was very strange, obviously, but Guildford, one of the rivers, has a sacred site there for the Noongar people from this area. So Noongar is like the name of the biggest tribe of Indigenous people that live around the Perth area.
Okay.
So so I don't know if that is relevant as well. but it just felt like some kind of ancestral spirit for some reason. It was just bizarre. And another time I was kind of lying in bed and woke up, and there was this strange face looking at me, and I shrieked, and I thought, oh, it's some kind of like hypnagogic thing. But my husband, he woke up, he reckons he woke up before I called out, and he said he actually saw something over me, but it was just like a very basic white shape.
Huh.
Like he thought it was a pillowcase.
Oh.
Yeah. So we both saw something, but what he saw was very, nondescript, and I saw something that was more formed. It was kind of like almost like a lion type face. It was very strange. So those are kind of some of the earlier experiences. Do you want me to start talking about what's been happening recently?
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Okay, I've been taking notes though, so I have a few thoughts here and there. But
do you want to say stuff now, Josh?
I mean, we can, I suppose.
Yeah, why don't you address that?
Well, I guess a good sort of leaping off point for where I am in my journey right now. Is that the farther I get into this, the harder I have really drawing distinctions between ancestral spirits and spirits of things that never lived and fairies and poltergeists. I mean, it's just you can find examples of these things being mixed up in general, especially like fairies and poltergeists. It was at one point commonplace to sort of blame poltergeists on fairies as much as it was on spirits. Although you can even say that fairies are spirits, but that's neither here nor there. But I've gotten to the point where I think that there is just this sort of energy that breaks through from the other side, and whether or not that was composed of people who lived or things that we would call elemental spirits, or I just think that all these things tend to mix up on that other side and sort of come over here and visit us. So whenever I ascribe something or compare something to something like, fairy folklore, I'm not necessarily saying it is that, but it certainly has sort of the hallmarks of that. Your childhood experience in the garden, you said that your mother basically looked up from doing dishes and she saw you outside, right?
That's right.
Okay, so there are a couple of stories that you can find here and there where, in the midst of a child abduction, a fairy has, taken a young boy or a young girl and drops them at some point, either accidentally or sometimes because, the parent, the abduction comes to the parent's attention. So the fact that she looked up and saw you out there kind of makes me wonder if you weren't dropped. Because, how far of a height would you have fallen if you'd fallen? I mean, would you have expected to be more injured than you were, or?
So apparently it was a story. It was a 2-storied house. And, I don't know. Babies have pretty soft bones. But,
that's true.
But I don't know. That's quite a far way to fall.
I mean, I wouldn't want to drop a baby from a story.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you do hear stories about, we're using the word story too much. You do hear anecdotes about children who are really young who just, bounce back unscathed. And even with my own kids, like you see them get into situations, you're like, are you sure you're okay? And you look at them and they're acting fine. You're like, I guess you are okay. So that's interesting though. About your UFO sighting that you had, was it a structured craft or was it a light in the sky, or what was it?
So I was walking down a busy street at night, so it was quite well lit, and that hindered a little bit of what I could see. It was pretty low, so I saw it coming towards me, and at first I thought it was a helicopter, and it was these 2 oval orange lights very close together. And then I realized that I couldn't hear anything. I stopped and I'm watching it. And as it flew over the top of me and over this busy street, I could see under it. And I could see that it had 3 circular lights in a triangle and a larger circular light in the middle. And they were pulsing really quickly. And but I didn't see any actual metal. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But it was really because it was low and the street lights were so bright. And then as it moved away, I saw this trail of silver sparkles coming out the back of it, like almost kind of like sparklers, like fireworks. It was bizarre.
Well, that's interesting that you compared it to a helicopter, because I've heard of there was a Min Min light sighting in Cloncurry, about 4 hours north of Boolia. Of course, obviously, a suburban setting or urban setting is not exactly where you'd expect to see the Min Min lights, but in this instance, that's the way that they described their sighting as well at first, is that they were convinced that it was a helicopter, and then they noticed, like you did, that there was no light at the same time. So it's interesting, from the same part of the world, you have sort of this anomalous light phenomena described in similar ways. But prior to that, you'd sort of been kind of shrugging off a lot of these little nudges that you've been getting from different things?
I don't know if I completely shrugged them off at that point, because there were a few times where I'd had experiences and then someone else confirmed for me independently later on. So that that gave me pause.
Yeah.
But I don't know, there was something about this UFO sighting that cemented that I can take these things seriously, and there's something going on here. It's not all internal. Or, I mean, we could go very philosophical with that. Is it internal? I mean, because in my mind, I believe that every single person has a reality that is valid, but I don't think we have one universal reality. I think every reality exists and overlaps and interacts beautifully and strangely, but they're different realities.
I mean, I think when you start playing that internal-external game, you sort of fall into this established physicalist paradigm trap of those being as separate as we have been led to believe, and I think there's a lot more room in the middle where these things sort of overlap. I would probably use the word objective. I mean, even that's sort of a lacking word, but the way that I've come to think of UFOs nowadays is I kind of almost halfway wonder if this wasn't whatever the intelligence is behind this stuff. Interestingly enough, I'm hearing a helicopter flying over my house right now. I kind of halfway wonder if this wasn't the moment where it was like, no, pay attention. Hey, pay attention. I kind of wonder if this wasn't the phenomenon saying, okay, we're going to give you something that you can't dismiss. So but all that's super, super fascinating. I'm sorry, I've just got a list of things because I've been listening intently. The four-leaf clover thing, I'm not entirely sure about this, but I do think that the association between four-leaf clovers and the Fae folk does stretch back farther than the sort of pop culture wing depiction, because that's the thing that whenever you talk to somebody who's into fairies, they're like, okay, well, they traditionally didn't have wings, and you sort of talk about how that's an invention of, that's only a couple hundred years old. But there are some things that have made their way to the modern pop culture depiction of fairies that actually do have sort of ancient roots. And I know that wands are among those. I'm not entirely sure about four-leaf clovers, but I do think that they are older in association with the Fae folk. So that's interesting too, because I mean, for me, I look for four-leaf clover all the time, and I never find them. I haven't found them since I was a kid.
Yeah, that's right. And it felt so strange because I've never found them, and we have wild clover growing, in suburban Australia. So it's definitely something that as a child you hear about it, and I've definitely looked for it. And it was very clear, and it was probably the first time in my life that I became aware that I would sometimes get these impressions or this, I call it an impression because it was like a voice sharing information in my head, but I'm not always hearing sound.
Right.
It's like an awareness, like you notice it kind of thing.
Like something put the knowledge in your head.
Yes, but you notice that it's not your own knowledge.
Yeah.
It's almost like there's been a couple of times where I've had an experience and I can say that I was channeling something, and it's like it's almost like something is being poured through my body, like something is traveling through my body and I'm still in there, but there's also this other stuff traveling through me, and it feels very almost like water being poured into a vessel. That's how I perceive it. So yeah, it was just kind of like, oh, okay. And then I went over to this pot plant and it was there. I mean, that's just strange.
Yeah, I don't care if it was, something even more mundane than a 4-leaf clover. The fact that you were pointed in that direction and knew that you would find it there is remarkable in and of itself. I don't know what to make of this wooden ring because it's tickling something in the back of my head and I can't put my finger on it and it's going to bug me. It's probably become a little minor project that I look for as I go through stuff.
Okay.
But, I mean, the circles are just sort of laden with symbolism as well. I would love to know what kind of wood it is, but I doubt that you sort of know that yourself.
I couldn't say for certain because it was already, and it looked cut, it was a slice. And then the outside edges were rough bark, the coarse bark of that tree, but the inside was pretty smooth as well. But we had a very large cherry blossom tree, which I used to sit in a lot, and I'm wondering if it was from that tree, but I'm not certain. We did have a chestnut tree in the front garden and a really big Japanese tree that had massive leaves, and the only other time I've seen that tree is in the botanical gardens in Melbourne, and that's how I've discovered it was some kind of Japanese tree, but the leaves are like the size of like a piece of photocopy paper. They were really big, and but yeah, I couldn't tell you for sure.
Yeah, well, it sounds beautiful. I assume that you don't have it anywhere or anything. It just probably got misplaced, or even if you even thought to pick it up. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have it anymore, sadly.
Yeah. Well, we kind of talked about the Min Light stuff. I've been quite fascinated by that. Seriah, have you seen that? Or maybe you have too. Sorry about that. Maybe you have too, Louise. This documentary, Australian Skies.
No,
it's Alien. Yeah. It's got some pretty good overview of some of the Min Light stuff. It's really fascinating. You listen to some of those Indigenous stories about how there's at least a loose belief that the number of Min Lights, they were always seen. Sometimes they were positive and sometimes they were negative. By the way, don't let me like Australia explain to you, Louise. I'm sort of doing this for the audience's benefit as well. But
that's fine. I'm from New Zealand. So
okay.
Go for it.
But there was an indication that or suggestion that they increased in frequency when the settlers arrived. And
I would not be surprised.
Well, and I'm sure that some of them, just like a lot of these ghost lights today, I'm sure that some of them are indeed those old, tired, skeptical dismissals of refracting car lights and headlights and campfires and such. But a lot of them, like your husband's description, I mean, that you can't explain that away with headlights or anything, especially becomes a little bit more unsettling with the missing time implications. But you hear these stories about them sort of descending into the back and just sort of keeping pace with your car, and you go fast, you slow down, they slow down, sort of thing. But the fact that it would wink out whenever he stopped is just its own level of disconcerting.
It's something definitely interacting with them.
So the vision of the First Nations gentleman with the sort of wrinkled face, I mean, that's something that you see. I don't necessarily hear it in any of the sort of Australian fairy analogs, which in general are admittedly a little bit harder to pin down. They don't quite appear as recognizably as some of those sort of comparable fairy-ish figures in other parts of the world. But even among those, I don't hear that description of that wrinkled face. But that wrinkled face is something that you hear all the time from the fairy stories in Western Europe and whatnot. Even some Indigenous American accounts, there's references to them being extremely old, but these sort of faces. I know some witnesses have compared them to the bog men, the bodies that were buried in peat. They sort of were preserved. They found in places like the Netherlands. But also on the Nunga site that's near you, I think that there probably is something to that. John Keel came up with this window area idea, which is it straddles the line between interesting and problematic in terms of, paranormal phenomena haunting these indigenous archaeological sites. It's interesting on the one hand because I do think that there's a pattern there, but it always gets sort of weird trying to pin that down when you're in sort of this post-colonial nation, when you're like, well, the entire countryside is probably littered with, unmarked graves, as grim as that is to think about.
No, it's true.
But
it's very true.
There's been a lot of effort in, the UK and in the Americas to sort of try to find window areas and pinpoint them and tie them to certain archaeological sites. I am not aware of a similar effort that's been put forth in Australia. I know Keith Basterfield sort of talked about this a little bit in his UFO research, but I've seen enough sort of examples that make me go, okay, there's probably something to that as well. That some of these, again, sometimes they're earthworks. Every culture seem to love those earthworks. Sometimes these earthworks and sort of sepulchral sites seem to indeed attract all sorts of phenomena that we would call paranormal, including, UFO sightings to this day. So I think that brings me up to speed.
All right.
I don't know what to do with your pillowcase ghost. Other than it sounds like a, from your husband's perspective, it sounds like a traditional ghost clad in a sheet, death shroud or something. Yeah. A fun fact, I learned that, and I haven't fact checked this, so if anybody, I'm sure somebody in the comments will correct me if I'm wrong, but apparently, like, the term boo comes from, it's a Latin cognate of alarm. So basically, when you see ghosts in Halloween going boo, they're basically saying "I alarm" so I alarm. Yeah, I don't know what to make of that, other than the fact that I will say that it's an extremely underreported aspect of these phenomena, and Seriah will vouch for me on this, where people both see something strange, but what they see that is strange is surprisingly different.
Yeah.
You hear that a ton, and a lot of paranormal researchers don't like to acknowledge that because they think it sort of invalidates the objective nature of what these people are seeing. But I think I think it's a detail that could be, as important as anything else to figuring out what these things are,
Well, for me, when he told me that he also saw something, that made it more real, because I thought, oh, it's a hypnagogic vision. It's a hallucination, because it was such a weird. So what it really looked like was those kind of, in Chinese New Year, the dragons.
Oh yeah.
Like, have you seen the dragon puppets that they use?
the big ones, right? The big.
Yes, it kind of had a face like that.
Mm.
So it was sort of like this lion dog, but sort of had that kind of look to it, and so it frightened me. But I instantly was like, oh, it's like a hypnopompic thing. And then my husband said, oh, that's weird, because I saw this white shape next to you. And I don't think he saw it like it was a draped sheet or something. I think it was more like a very vague white kind of rectangle type shape. And so for me, I was like, okay, well, something was happening there.
Yeah, I think that's the important takeaway. And as far as answers for what that was, again, we don't really have answers for what any of this stuff is objectively, but you might get a little bit more mileage out of someone who has an experience with Goetic spirits or something, because it kind of sounds a little bit more like that in terms of depiction. Sorry, that's all. I was just took all these notes. I want to make sure we got through them. So yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the more recent stuff over the last few months.
Okay. Another thing that I just remembered was behind where we live, there's been a big building going on, construction. So disturbed earth was another element that I think is relevant. So we had, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I thought I dropped out. So, gosh, we had our daughter about 4 years ago now, and her bedroom has a very large window that looks out onto our neighbour's chicken coop, which is mostly very large fruit trees, very established old fruit trees. There's a beautiful big mulberry tree that's got to be about 3 meters tall. It's gigantic. And since she could speak, she would talk about how she didn't like being in her room. There was a man in her room, and he would sit in the chair in her bedroom. And
Oh.
and I had sometimes felt a bit weird in her room. And so I wasn't sure if I was being oversensitive and kind of playing into what she was saying, or if there was something weird going on with the energy in that space. I would say I probably did burn some herbs in there as like a cleansing, because it is something I do in the house from time to time. And, apart from that, my husband and I just played it off as, child imagination and fear that's going to happen from time to time. I mean, it's hard when they're that small to ascertain what is a real experience and what is, a dream. They don't have, they're not able to verbalize very much. So anyway, she would talk about this man being in her room sometimes. And apart from that, not much, but she would have, from time to time, she would get night terrors. And I don't know if either of you are familiar with that, but a night terror is basically when the child will have something like a nightmare and they seem awake, but they are still unconscious and they are screaming, like they are terrified. It's very upsetting. It can go from 5 minutes to 20 minutes and they won't have a memory of it the following day. It's really hard. And so that started happening from when she was, certainly less than a year old. Didn't happen all the time, but it would happen here and there. Okay, so...
Yeah, that's just horrible to have to deal with on every level.
Yeah.
It is. It's really hard, especially when they're so small.
Yeah.
And you can see that they are terrified and you can't reach them when they're in that state, when it first happened, I mean, we didn't know what was going on. Thankfully, it doesn't happen anymore, touch wood. So I'm just trying to remember because it's been over a few years now. That's right. So out her window, we had this morning glory vine growing along the fence. And morning glory vine, especially if you cut it back, it just grows back 4 times as fast, and it can get out of control really quickly. And so she started talking about this tree man, and we thought, oh, okay, maybe she's having like a pareidolia issue with the vine outside because it was getting quite tall, growing on the side of the fence and vaguely looked like a head shape. So my husband cut it back and we thought, okay, that's it. Everything's fine. But she would continue to wake up at night and come into our room. And it got to the point where during the day she wouldn't go in her bedroom by herself for any reason. We would have to go with her. She didn't even like going into the bathroom, which was she'd have to walk down the corridor past her room to get to the bathroom. She just didn't want to be in there at all. And my husband and I were getting pretty tired because she would wake up literally every night screaming and come into our room and sleep in our bed. And we had actually bought a double bed for her room because our plan was, okay, if she's coming in, we can't deal with the broken sleep, so one of us can then go sleep in her bed.
Right.
Now, something that my husband and I hadn't actually admitted to each other is we didn't like sleeping in that bed. We didn't like being in that room. And so we hadn't really verbalized it. So he would have bad experiences if he slept in that bed, and I would have bad experiences if I slept in that bed. I don't know why we didn't talk about this. And so this went on for a few months, and then it got to the point where my husband went and slept in there one night. And the following morning, I was out in the kitchen and he came out and he said, I had the worst night's sleep. He said, all night I felt like something was trying to rip the blankets off me, and he could feel what felt like hands on his body pulling at his shirt.
Whew.
And I said, oh, you're right. I said, the other week, because we get to the point where we're so desperate for sleep, we'll sleep in there. I said the other week, when I went and slept in her bed, I had this dream that I was being attacked by this hag-like entity. She was like that old crone, kind of looking very white, attacking me, and I destroyed her with a beam of white light, and she disintegrated. And then we both said, yeah. He said every time he has slept in there, he's had that experience of something pulling on him. I said, okay, well, I'm scared to be in that room at night. He said, me too. And I'm like, well, there's obviously something wrong with this room. We have to sort it out. So that was kind of when we realized this isn't just toddler separation anxiety. Yeah. There's something else happening.
Yeah.
Now, at the same time, not exactly at the same time, because this had been happening over a couple of years and it had just gotten worse as time went on. Last October, I'll go a bit further back than this because this is relevant. A couple of years ago, I had this kind of out-of-body experience where I was in spirit form and I was flying around with this goddess-type female-looking deity. And I deduced that she was probably a deity because of what was happening in this experience. So she was flying around like a rural property, like a farm, and this man had put out a plate of biscuits for her, like sweet biscuits, cookies, and she was hovering over them and thanking him for this offering, and she was blessing these animals. And then we were in another scenario where she was taking a dog off a couple. And so the dog had died, but she was taking the dog. And she was really excited about having this relationship with this dog. And I remember the people being sad, but they couldn't see that their dog had actually gone to be with this woman who really loved their dog. And it was like the dog hadn't died. It was just moving on to this other part of its existence, basically. And there was a lot more to this dream, which I talk about with Seriah in the earlier episode. Anyway, I woke up from that and I looked up goddesses and dogs and all these other things, agriculture, and I came up with Diana. And then I read about how maybe Hekate she was Diana, or they're the same thing, or so. Yeah, anyway, I'm not sure if it was Diana. Yeah, a bit fuzzy, yeah, but
if memory serves, Diana was combined with Hekate and I believe Luna into this this tri-faced or tripartite deity named Trivia. Yeah, so there's a connection there. Mythology gets real messy real quick.
Yes. So that was a really interesting thing. So I felt this connection to this deity because I didn't know any of that stuff before I had that dream. To me, it wasn't a dream. It was because I've had one other experience like that where I was out of body and I was flying around people, and it didn't look like a dream. So there's a differentiation there for me. So anyway, last October, I decided I'll do a little offering in the new moon as kind of an acknowledgement and giving thanks to Hekate, and kind of do like a little manifestation spell, not thinking too much about it. And also that October of last year, I forgot to look it up, but it was some celestial event that happened in conjunction with this new moon that made it more of a powerful event. I just can't remember what it was. Also take into consideration that I'm on a crossroads, so it's kind of a charged area. And I sat down to do a simple ritual, and I think I read a poem, and the candle started crackling. It must have been about 10 or 11 o'clock at night. It was actually quite late. And it popped. It popped twice. And the second time it popped, I felt this presence enter the space. And it was such a powerful, scary feeling. It was like darkness falling, if that makes sense. It was like something fell over the air in that room, and I felt the presence of Hekate, and it felt very dark, but it didn't feel evil, which I thought was very interesting. And so I almost freaked out, and I thought, no, this is okay. This is just how she feels, and you're safe. So I finished doing this ritual, and that feeling went away. And then the following night, my husband was in the bathroom, and he looked out the window and he saw this orb of light traveling downwards from the sky. Now, I just need to explain that our side of the property and our neighbours, they have a really long property. So their house is at the front, and then they have a really long backyard and a large shed, and then the chicken coop. So our bathroom window looks onto their shed, which is really tall. It's you could fit cars in there. It's really big. And then this chicken coop. So there's no physical way for a person to be there unless they would be on our property and we would hear someone walking there because it's brick. So he sees this ball of light traveling downwards from above, so assuming the sky, but higher up in the air. And he said that he felt like this ball of light became aware that he was watching it, and then it just went pew, and it just flew out of his line of sight along the side of the house, and it was gone. And it, again, no sound. So I feel like if it was a drone, he would have heard it. It wasn't like a rainy night or anything like that. The night after that, we were in bed and he was asleep, and I was still awake, and my eyes weren't closed or anything. And I heard singing, and it was the weirdest thing. It was in our room, and it was just disembodied singing of a feminine voice. It was tonal. There weren't any words. It was more like a la 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 kind of like melody type song. And I'm lying there like, what the hell is going on? It went on for about 30 seconds. So it went on for a while. And it was the most beautiful sounding singing, but it did freak me out. And so it stopped, and I was too scared to get up and check on my daughter because I thought maybe it was her, but it was actually in our bedroom. Like I felt like it was above me. And I don't think it could have been her because it didn't sound like a toddler. It sounded like an adult woman. And then it came back a second time, but it was a little bit quieter, and it didn't go for as long. It was just kind of like 10 seconds, like it was just floating there, and then it stopped. So that was a couple of weird things that happened. Would you like me to keep going? Or?
I'm sure Joss has some comments.
Just a few thoughts. So it's interesting that you mentioned the whole morning glory vine, because morning glory seeds, as I understand, are psychoactive. And yes. I'm not saying that your daughter was dosing in the middle of the night or anything, or that you were getting a proximity high from morning glory, but it's interesting when you look at sort of the culture, that sort of subculture that focuses around entheogens. They often talk about sort of the plants having their own intelligence. A lot of these psychedelic plants have their own sort of spirit attached to them. So the fact that she would see, I
believe that
a plant person kind of puts me in the mindset that, I don't know, maybe it was the spirit of the morning glory that was popping along.
The only thing I wouldn't agree with that is that I believe it's a specific type of morning glory that is psychoactive. It's the kind that has a white flower, and this is a purple flower.
Okay.
Just as an aside.
No, I mean, I don't think I knew that, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, and if you keep on looking into dogs and obviously dogs and Hekate, but just dogs in general as a symbol, it's sort of its own rabbit hole in and of itself. There are all these different cultures that have these characters that are psychopomps that sort of lead you across predominantly the threshold of life into death, but just, I would argue, sort of thresholds more generally. And sometimes they're folk figures, sometimes they're deities, sometimes they're natural phenomena, sometimes they're animals, and time and again across all sorts of different cultures. I mean, I would say it's almost universal. You find horses, birds, and dogs as these figures, and if memory serves, I think there was quite a bit of dog sacrifice in the name of Hekate. And Hekate isn't necessarily a death deity herself, but she is sort of chthonic in the idea that she has these associations with the underworld. So that idea of, being dark but not evil kind of fits that as well. So the light from the sky was the same night as your ritual to Hekate, right?
It was the following night.
The following night, okay. Yeah, I mean, I'd hesitate to say that's coincidence.
Yeah.
Does your husband have any childhood experiences?
Not really.
Or do you think you're rubbing off on him? I guess would be the question.
Look, his mum was very sensitive, and she had quite a few weird experiences herself. And when she passed, we both saw her. So that's, I don't know. He doesn't really think he's had that much happen, certainly in his childhood or anything like that. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it does, it does sort of make you wonder if you sort of dug a little bit deeper or you maybe got him a little bit more suggestible how many things he might remember that he dismissed at one point.
Absolutely. He's definitely felt presences, and he's open-minded about things, but he hasn't. I mean, I've had a lot of experiences, so compared to him, he hasn't had that much happening, so he probably doesn't think he is that much of a conduit, but
right.
I mean, so one of the reasons why I reached out to Seriah was because because these two things were happening at the same time. I really wasn't sure. Is this Hekate? Is this Fae? Is this just, is this something else? Because there is a couple of more things that happened, but I just thought the timing was so interesting that I did that ritual, and then he saw that ball of light, and then I had heard that singing, which I've had some clairaudience type experiences before, but this was very, very unusual.
Well, with that sort of syncretization, sort of combining between Hekate and Diana, you do sort of have a little bit of a foot in the door to sort of a fairy connection, because Diana sort of becomes, through different folklores, recognized as sort of a queen of the fairy. It depends, but like there's definitely an association there. There's also some older, pagan deities like Habundia that also sort of combine elements of Hekate and Diana as well, in that sort of fairy queen sort of role. I mean, this is sort of what I was trying to get at when I sort of had that awkward preamble when we first started talking about how it's gotten hard for me to differentiate between these things, because obviously, like, Hekate is not a fairy queen. You can't say that, but there's so much mixing and matching that it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take a lot of leaps to get to that sort of connection there. The singing, I think, is super interesting as well. I mean, throughout all these different contact modalities, from the fairy lore to the UFO stuff to the near-death experiences to psychedelic trips, you see this theme coming around time and again of this sort of music or singing that is just indescribably beautiful or elegant. And you said it was incredibly beautiful. Would you go so far as to describe? But what's interesting though is that you said it was tonal, so I assume that it wasn't like. Because sometimes you get these descriptions that say that the music was not adhering to any sort of Western tonality. I don't know how musically inclined you are, but it seems to use different scales and different modes that we just don't really have any comparable analog for. So, I mean, if you to the degree that you can, would you have described this as like indescribably beautiful, or would you say that it's sort of you can imagine somebody being able to transcribe it and play it back, or does it seem like it would be beyond that sort of an attempt?
I don't think it was beyond a translation. It was fairly simple, and it was a woman singing. She was just kind of going la la la. She wasn't saying actual words. And I think I actually had it in my mind for a little bit, and then I lost it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds pretty typical.
Yeah, it wasn't some kind of body of sound, that was like vibrating or anything like that. It was just like someone with a beautiful voice singing. Yeah.
That's still interesting though. I mean, because you do get reports from time to time of entities sort of speaking in a sort of lilting sing-song, Sprechstimme kind of way as well, yeah.
All right, let's take a very quick break, and we'll be right back. Mid-show break here, and I'm going to give you a recommendation of something to check out. A few things to check out. Some contact info and some news on what's upcoming at some point. So I'm going to start with the recommendation, and this came from my friend Matt Festa, who, knowing I'm a big wrestling fan, suggested I check out this podcast called Behind the Bastards. Now, this is not a wrestling podcast. This is a podcast, I think two of the guys used to work for Cracked, and I don't know, they're all funny. But it covers people in history from Stalin to like John McAfee to Alfred Hitchcock, and most recently Mark Zuckerberg, and most recently Vince McMahon. So all I've listened to are the 5, I'm going into part 6 of the Vince McMahon stuff, and I think this is one of the longest part ones they've done. They literally call him history's greatest monster. It's hilarious and disturbing all at the same time, but the podcast itself is great. And even if you're not interested in the Vince McMahon stuff, you might find some of the other stuff interesting. I know I'm going to go back and check out some of their other stuff when I finish this, because I'm really enjoying it, and it's making me laugh a lot, and I'm learning things. Wrestling history to me is very interesting, even when what was going on television, which much of the WWF I've never cared for. The stuff going on behind the scenes I've always found fascinating, and that's what they're getting into. And it's interesting, and like I said, it's funny as well. They have a great sense of humor about the stuff, and so my thanks to Matt for that one. Also, Matt is doing the artwork for my autobiography. He is a phenomenal artist, and you can check out his stuff at Tiamat's Garden. And he's just phenomenal. And so far, what he has for the book cover is awesome. And there's still no title. He's not happy that I'm not giving him a title, because I don't know what it's called yet. It's going to have to name itself at some point. But for anyone who, I think I may have only announced this to patrons at this point. So the autobiography, which I've been working on forever, and I had been working on it and had a restart, thanks to Mike Cleland, which also, thanks to Mike Cleland, it's going to be a much better book. It's hopefully going to be out this year. Hopefully. I mean, ideally, I'd love to have it out by October, but I don't know if that's going to happen. But hopefully by the end of the year, beginning of next year, the first part of my autobiography will be out. And it's not just the paranormal stuff. It's all the stuff in my life. I mean, not everything. I'm trying to leave the boring stuff out, but just all the unusual stuff that's happened to me on all levels, from music to the paranormal and all that, because it all kind of ties together in really weird ways. And that's one of the things that Mike woke me up to. So I realized that the reason I was told initially to keep these notes like I was is so I could do this and give you a grander overview that these paranormal events don't happen in a vacuum. There's a lot of things that just all interconnect in weird ways. So hopefully it'll be interesting. The first volume is only going to go up to the end of 1995. And the reason for that is the word count is outrageous at this point for what I was expecting. And I still haven't filled it out completely. So it's going to be a decent length. And then there'll be either 1 or 2 more volumes after that, assuming anyone cares and buys it. So, it's also been very interesting self-reflection as well. I definitely recommend keeping notes about things going on in your life, dreams and weird stuff, and even normal stuff. There'll be stuff that you're glad you wrote down later, and there's stuff you're going to cringe at. But, I mean, that's part of growth. If there's nothing you're cringing at, you may not have grown very much. All right, so yes, my thanks to Matt for helping me with this, for the artwork. And again, check out his stuff at Tiamat's Garden. He also sometimes co-hosts, jumps in as a co-host on The Last Exit for the Lost, my music show. So if you like heavy music and you want to hear something different, because I play a lot of stuff you're not going to hear otherwise, or not have brought into your awareness otherwise, a lot of independent stuff, a lot of obscure stuff that's really good and shouldn't have been missed maybe the first time. That's thelastexit.org, and there's a bunch of shows up going all the way back to 96, actually, that you can stream anytime. The newest stuff is on Mixcloud, so you can subscribe there. We have live band performances and cool stuff like that. And yeah, Matt's one of the co-hosts. One of the other co-hosts I'm going to give a shout out to is Katie of the Night. They both come on remotely, and Katie has a cool YouTube channel called Katie of the Night, where she once listed Where Did the Road Go as her favorite podcast, and then we connected and been friends ever since. All right, contact for the show. If you have a story you want to share, want us to read on a listener story show, you just want to relay it and get my thoughts on it, stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com. Contact@wheredidtheroadgo.com for all basic queries and things like that. There's a little chat bot that'll pop up when you go to the website, and that does go directly to me. That is not AI generated whatsoever. You can mail me stuff. You want to physically mail me stuff. It's P.O. Box 444, Ovid, New York, 14521. And I want to give an extra special shout out to Ann Witowski for a very generous donation to the show this week. All right, as for other things coming up, there's a bunch of video stuff I'm going to be posting. Some of it's only going to be for patrons. Some of it's going to be public. I did put up the Fort Fest appearances from 2016. Of myself, Joshua Cutchin, and Mike Hughes, and they were for patrons only for a long time. I eventually was going to make them public and totally forgot about them until someone told me the links weren't working. So I've made those public. You can check them out on the YouTube channel. The audio is not great. Whoever was doing it was, if I remember right, was going to release them with better sound and stuff, and I don't think it ever happened. So that's all I got are those. I know Rosemary Ellen Guiley was there that weekend. I didn't get to see her talk. Did get to meet her and talk to her, and she was wonderful, and she was going to come on the show, and then she passed away, as these things go. But so I don't know where all that stuff is. But those three are up if people want to check them out. Again, can't do anything about the sound. It was a big room, and it was a little echoey. Not my fault. I just had it on a camera with a boom mic that picks up stuff very well. But there is more video stuff coming. And I think people will enjoy it. So make sure you subscribe to the YouTube, and I will try and also make notes about it during the actual podcast as well, so people know to go look. All right. So I think that's it. Let's go back to the show. So you're listening to Where Did the Road Go? And I have Joshua Cutchin and Louise Hamill, and we are talking about Louise's very strange experiences. And for people who didn't hear the first part, go search it on the Where Did the Road Go site, because there's a lot more detail in there than what we went over at the beginning here. But we were talking about, what was the last thing we were talking about?
I want to say Morning Glory, but I think...
The singing.
The singing,
oh,
yes.
The singing, yes. So that happened in October of last year. And at the same time as this is happening, my daughter's having a lot of issues with waking up and coming to our room. And at that exact moment, after doing the ritual, my husband and I, we hadn't talked about how we'd had issues ourselves with her room. So it was a few months later when my husband had experience with something grabbing him and pulling on him in the bed. And then I remembered being attacked by something in her bed another night. So after that, we talked to my daughter a little bit about what was happening. Just kind of asked her, what do you think's happening in your room? What do you think it is? And she just said, yeah, I don't like being in my room. There's a tree man and he watches me. And I asked her, what does he look like? And she said, he's made of leaves. And she didn't really say anything else. I said to her, well, we're going to sort it out. It's okay. Things like this happen sometimes. And I can say that because of my own experiences.
Right.
And I did not want my daughter to go through something like this and be alone with it, because
right.
I had that when I was growing up, and it can be very scary. And, there are things you can do to neutralize spaces and situations like this. So I said, we're going to go to the crystal shop, and it's more than a crystal shop. It's like a herbalist, and you can buy books on witchcraft.
Right.
I said, we'll go to the crystal shop and we can get some things, and we can tell whatever it is that it has to go. So we went to this beautiful shop that's just around the corner from us and spoke to the lady there, and So we got some black obsidian and a bag of herbs with a sigil in it, like a protection spell, and a black candle and a white candle, and some sage. And so we cleansed her room, and we said to whatever it is, you have to go and you can't be here anymore. And we drew some runes outside her window, and I read that cloves are good as a protection symbol. So we put some dried cloves on her windowsill, and that night she had a really good sleep. The following night, I had in our room, I felt like something was in our room. And so, yes, I made a mistake in that I did not cleanse the whole house at that point. And I do have to also explain that we were very sleep deprived by this point because of the waking up. So it was getting a bit stressful. And so, you know, that could play into it as well, of course.
Oh, yeah.
And so that night I felt like on my side of the bed that something was there. And our house is a little bit strange in that it's hard to explain, but our bedroom has 2 doors right next to each other. One goes out into my studio and living area, and the other door goes into the bathroom. So it's this weird feeling of doorways and entranceways, and I've always had a bit of a weird feeling around doorways, and obviously there's symbolism there.
Yeah.
So anyway, I had that feeling, and I was lying down in bed, and I felt this hand on the side of my head, and I started to go into sleep paralysis. And it was like the sleep paralysis started at the top of my head and was traveling down my body. And it was very scary, and I was able to break out of it quite quickly, and I just called out to my husband, and it stopped. And then I started praying to Archangel Michael. So when I was 16, I lived in a very haunted house, and I used to call on and pray for help from Archangel Michael, and I would feel like this weird wave of heat, and sometimes I would get a ringing in one of my ears, and I always felt like his presence very strongly. And anyway, when I was doing this, it felt completely shut off. And as soon as I started asking for his help, I felt the hand on my head again. And again, I felt the sleep paralysis like traveling from my head down my body, which I've never felt it in that way before. It was very strange. And luckily I was able to break out of it. And I called out to my husband, and then I think I slept with the light on. And the following day I just saged the whole house, and I kind of said, look, sorry, because I was a bit yelly in my daughter's room. I was a bit angry, and I was a bit more polite. And so nothing happened after that for quite some time, but I was very disturbed by that because I'd always felt like I could call on this archangel for help, and it was like gone. Yeah. And it really felt like something was blocking it. And I don't know if that was Hekate saying, no, I'm the one that's helping you, right, or if it was something else that was just a bit angry and chaotic. But yeah, it pretty much stopped. And then maybe 2 months later, I made a joke to my husband about it. And that night I had sleep paralysis. And so I was actually a bit nervous to even talk to you guys today. I saged the house before because I feel very sensitive. It just feels very sensitive if I talk about it. Right. Something can happen. And the last thing that happened was, so after that, her room feels completely different. So she sleeps in there now. If she wakes up, we can sleep in there with her, and it does not have that feeling at all. It's fine. It's that one morning. Wow. One morning my husband was sitting with her having breakfast. This was only like maybe less than 2 weeks ago, because it was when I first started getting sick with this cold. So I was still in bed, and he, out of the corner of his eye, saw me walk past the hallway to go to the bathroom. Then he realised it wasn't me because I was still in bed, And then again, he saw this figure behind him when he was in the kitchen very briefly. And then he realised that my daughter had taken the spell bag of herbs, the sigil and the crystal out of her room, and she had them on the table. So he put them back in her room, and nothing happened after that. But the last thing that happened that made me really feel like there's a fae element was, a month or two after this had kind of been resolved, I had taken my daughter to playgroup, and one of the activities they do is they make bread. And so she had made a bread roll and brought it home with her, and she didn't want to eat it. And I said to her, well, shall we put it in the compost? We can give it to the fairies. And so we went and we put it in the garden. And when we came back inside, I opened the door and we heard this piercing whistle in our living room. Just went for like 2 seconds. And it was so loud. And my husband was like, did you hear that? And I said, yeah. And later on, I said to him, when you think of the instrument that made that noise, what do you think of? And he said, a wooden flute. I said, yes. That's what I thought as well. And that is kind of what's been happening.
Huh. That's it, huh?
That's sort of it.
Just that, yeah.
Just that. Occasionally, I think I had sleep paralysis recently, and again, I asked for. This was in my daughter's room actually, because I went in there to sleep with her. I was asking for Archangel Michael to help me, and I got sleep paralysis, and I was grinding the only thing I could move was my teeth, and I could hear them moving around in my mouth. And so it's strange because whatever it is in that moment, it doesn't feel evil, but I'm very disturbed by the fact that something is blocking this protective being that I have called on in the past, and it has been helpful to me, and it feels very blocked.
I mean, what it makes me think of is that things are changing. And so like your connection to things is different. So it's something else is trying to assist you. That's what
I thought as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily blocking it, as maybe frequencies have changed in such a way that you're not connecting like you were to that other thing.
Yeah. I mean, I have felt more connected to pagan things, and I have been thinking about those elements more. But the thing is that I don't know if I would call myself pagan. I kind of believe in a lot of different spiritual beings, and I believe in, at this point, I'm trying to make sense of. I do believe in these archangels, but I do believe in Hekate as well. So
I'm sorry if you've addressed this on your last appearance, but how did you get drawn to the whole Hekate thing?
Oh, it was really because of that out-of-body experience, or that dream where I was flying around with this deity while I was, observing them do their thing, and I didn't know who it was. And so I typed in, a goddess and the things that they were interacting with, and it came up with Diana. And I was reading about how Hekate is connected to Diana. So, it's kind of like a grey area, to be honest, but I don't know. It came out of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, again, the fact that you are at the crossroads. I mean, that's her natural environment.
Yes.
It's just so interesting. It kind of seems like you were called into that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did feel that way, and to be honest, I didn't feel ready. I wasn't prepared for how powerful everything was to feel. I wasn't expecting to feel her presence when I did that ritual, and it felt, when you feel the presence of an invisible being, it's so strong. And, when it's something that's otherworldly, it's big. It's a big feeling.
Yeah, it's different than, say, sensing a dead relative or something like that.
Very.
Yeah, I have not, knock on wood, or maybe not. Maybe I want this to happen to a degree. I have not experienced this myself, but the people whom I've talked to, there are a lot of ways that these things come through, and sometimes you do get the dramatic stuff. Sometimes you do get a clear voice or something. Sounds like you've obviously had some some dramatic things come through. But it's also, a lot of times people who are, who are magical practitioners, will say things just like, you just feel the atmosphere in the room change, and it's obvious,
Yeah. And with the sleep paralysis, when you said you felt like a hand on your head, you were wide awake when that happened, right?
I was, because actually I was getting stressed out because I couldn't fall asleep.
Yeah.
So I was feeling this presence in the room. So I knew something was there that wasn't, I'm not going to say whatever it is evil, because that's a really big statement to make, but it just feels very chaotic and very powerful. But I don't know if it's something from the garden that's like attached, that's part of an old tree, or if it's Hekate. Yes.
I mean, it doesn't seem like it's done anything malicious in any way. I mean, it's been scary, but scary is subjective.
Yeah.
No one has gotten hurt is sort of what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, sort of the way that I've been thinking nowadays is that I'm not trying to belittle anybody who does get hurt in these experiences, but sometimes that can be a catalyst for, bigger and sometimes better things. You talk to people who are in, recovery for substance abuse, and a lot of them who make it out the other side and stick to it wouldn't trade their rock bottom for anything. So, sometimes there's, obviously I would take issue with something harming a child, but and obviously I would take issue with something harming you. That's not what I'm saying, but
No, but the thing is when it was happening, even though it was very scary, I didn't feel like it was coming from a bad place.
Yeah.
It was almost like going, why are you asking for this help from them when I can help you? Like, I didn't get that message, like, in my mind, like it's information, but that's kind of what I took away from it, as opposed to I'm going to take over you kind of thing and hurt you. It was scary, but it did not feel malevolent. That's right.
Well, and there's also this, sort of the presence of Hekate, I would imagine, puts you in touch with the darker side of things that we oftentimes as a culture tend to ignore.
Yes.
And when we ignore those things, they don't go away. And
right.
I think it's sort of a call to sort of incorporate that into your own life, whatever that might look like.
Yeah. I think also because of my earlier experiences as a teenager, when I used to get sleep paralysis then, and whatever was disturbing me at that point was not a nice, friendly thing. So having that background, it does make me panic a little bit, I think, because that was not a good time.
Let me ask you this: when you've had sleep paralysis before, was it upon waking up, or was it like this where you were still awake, you had just laid down and then entered sleep paralysis?
I think more often you mean in the past?
Yeah.
I have a lot of memories of it happening when I was trying to go to sleep. Like there was one experience I had, and I think I spoke to you about it, was at my parents' old house, this house that was haunted. I was trying to go to sleep, and I had this, I could feel something in the air, the presence. And I remember I could still move at that point, and I think my eyes were open. And I thought I can feel like something's going to get on the bed. And I felt this thing jump on the bed, and it was small. It was like the size of a cat. And then I couldn't move. And whatever it was climbed on top of me, and it was shaking my headboard with its hands. Like it was around my shoulders, shaking the headboard, because I could hear, it was like a wrought iron bed head, and I could hear it shaking. And when I broke out of it, I turned the lights on and I shook the headbed, and it made the same sound. So it wasn't like I was imagining how it might sound. It was making the sound.
Yeah.
So something was shaking that headboard. And I have wondered if that was like an imp or something, because in my mind it was like a small kind of goblin-y type thing.
Yeah.
So that was I was trying to go to sleep, but I have had experiences where there were a few times where I woke up and something was touching me or climbing on my back.
Yeah, that seems to be the more common thing, is that people wake up with sleep paralysis.
I was about to say, I wish that we, as a sort of paranormal community, would get a little bit better about distinguishing hypnopompia from hypnagogia. What I mean by that is hypnopompia meaning going into sleep and hypnagogia coming out of sleep, because I think I have my own suspicions about the possible significance of those things. And in the few times that I've probably had sleep paralysis type stuff when I'm coming out of sleep, but it's interesting that you had yours going into sleep, because you don't hear of that, as Seriah alluded to, you don't hear of that as often. But I kind of wonder if, again, where I've landed, I feel like I keep on having to preface that because I haven't been on this show that often. But where I've landed recently is that, there's something, we might very well be sort of astral traveling every night when we sleep. And if that's the case, there might be some significance to the things that you see when you leave your body as opposed to when you come back to your body.
True.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
but I thought that the incident at the end with the bread and then the flute playing, that felt very positive.
Yes, it sounds it.
Yeah, and I think you're aware of this, but I'll reiterate it for anybody else listening. It's another one of those things that sounds like it's a pop culture fairy depiction, but it's actually something that you find going really far back. This idea of flute or pipe music happening a lot. I mean, that's part of the reason that we see, the pan pipes sort of idea with pan playing as pipes. But yeah, this, I just did, while we were talking, I just did a quick little scan through the fairy census, which, if anybody is not aware of this, it was compiled by Dr. Simon Young, and it's a great compilation of sort of fairy sightings. I can't remember the exact years, but you can find it if you just type in fairy census. You can find loads of different reports, and in about at least 5 of those, just doing a quick search for the word flute, you can find references to that sort of sound even in modern sightings today. So it's completely on point, especially on the heels of your daughter saying that she wanted to give this bread to the fairies. I mean, that's So I take it the offering was indeed made, right?
Yeah, I mean, she didn't want to eat it, and I said to her, should we put it in the garden for the fairies? And I actually didn't know that was a traditional offering for the fairies, to give them bread.
Yeah, 100%.
So a friend of mine said, oh, that's actually a traditional offering. Like, oh, wow. So, and actually outside her window, because it's autumn coming into winter now, we get nasturtium plants growing in our garden. And this year, on her side of the outside her window, it's just full of nasturtiums. It's never been like that before, and it feels very nice out there. So I feel like there has been a shift in energy.
I'm an idiot. What's a nasturtium?
So it's like the leaves are kind of round, and the flowers are like an orange or yellow, and they're an edible flower.
Oh,
so
wow.
It's nasturtium, I think, with an M on the end. They grow nasturtium, nasturtium. They're an edible flower, and we had them growing on the other side of the house and put a couple along her side, but it's completely filled. So I felt like that was like a nice peace offering or something. It just has a feeling out there that's very pleasant. It did not always feel that way.
Yeah, and I'm sort of proud of you for doing that, because I think that people often overlook their ability to sort of tailor their environment to sort of be more positive and be healthier. I think that gets overlooked a lot.
But
and look. Okay. Sorry, you go.
Oh, I was going to. It sounds like the stuff you've done has been primarily the right stuff to do. I mean, you've progressed through this. It sounds in a very positive way.
True. I just have to navigate how I feel, because I still sometimes feel pretty scared at night. Because I am concerned about sleep paralysis.
Right.
So there's been a couple of times where I've thought it may happen, and I've just kind of said to my body and to the ether, I don't need to have this experience. I don't want to have this experience. I would like to sleep and be left alone. No, thank you. And so I think if I continue to do that, I might be fine.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe try and connect better to whatever this thing is, whether it be Hekate or something else that's trying to connect with you.
I'm a little bit I'm a little bit hesitant to do that because where do I draw the line? You know, like and this is why I started to get a bit nervous when I first made this connection was I wasn't expecting something so tangible, you know, and so I don't want to be disrespectful if I stop interacting with something, and I don't want things to go pear-shaped, you know.
Sure.
So I don't know if I don't know what to do.
Well, honestly, it doesn't sound like you have to do much. I mean,
exactly.
Like just there, you know. I do think it is also healthy to keep some of this stuff at arm's length to a degree. You know, I've seen too many people and heard about too many people who sort of go all in with this stuff, and it tends to have a disrupting aspect on people's lives. To say
That's
the least.
true.
Absolutely.
All right.
Because I think we just. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say. I was just going to say we don't really know what we're doing at the end of the day. So.
Nope. And maybe they don't either.
Yeah.
And maybe that's because it's us, you know?
Yeah.
That's the other thing.
Yeah.
So we are out of time. And Louise, you have artwork up, right?
I do. So I'm an artist. You can go to www.louisehamill.net. You can see my work there, and I'm also on Instagram at Louise_Hamill_.
All right. And Josh, where can people find you?
JoshuaCutchin.com, JoshuaCutchin.com. Ecology of Souls is coming up on a full year out in 2 months, and Fairy Films just came out a couple of weeks ago, and I just finished a novel like a damn fool. So I've got a lot of stuff in the past and in the present and on the horizon in the future as well.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
I'd like to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons who help make this show possible, because without you, this show would be much, much less than what it is. And I want to give a special shout out to all of those pledging $10 or more. Illuminati, Greg Ross, Chuck Shutters, Leanne Cherry, Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Bart Ooms, 36 Dingo, Matthew Sproul, Andrew Nichols, Christine, a blue 2nd Gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, Chris, CJ, Craig Cicernos, Craig Parmenter, Diane B., MTK, Eric Todd, History and Coffee, J. Otto Bullitt, James Lattimore, James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linda, Linz Jackson K., Jack Huntington, Luke Osborne, MJ Armstrong, Mark Brady, Mr. Weird, Oli Andre Olar, Patricia W., Paul Jeffries, Philosopher of Mirrors, Ray Benedetto, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Russ Rouse, Sam Sharon, Seed Person 1, Stacy Sherwood, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunder Boy, Tyler Glimstead, Varosh K, Vincent Trewell, Walker, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Ren Collier, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, and Craig Sagastumi. Thank you all so much for your support. All right, there is no specific Patreon segment for this show, but I have some Patreon stuff I'm going to be putting up. And if you want to become a patron, it helps support the show a lot. And it's only $3 a month. And you get extra stuff all month long. The show's a week early, and extra little special things here and there. And you can do so, you can become a patron at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Just click on the big patron link. And like I said, it's only $3, and you get tons of extra content. All right. That's it for this week. See you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.